So this weekend, we have one of the most anticipated games all year, or at least a game we thought would come about. And that is the Alabama Crimson Tide taking on the Georgia Bulldogs in a game that has a ton of implications, especially for the Crimson Tide trying to get a playoff spot. We need to break all of this down, but before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes or an N for no. And given Alabama's inconsistencies, do you think that the Crimson Tide can take down the Georgia Bulldogs come Saturday? And let me know what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. I'm on my push to 10,000 subscribers, and I would absolutely love to have you along for this journey. And if you did enjoy this content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions, though they may seem small, are massive to content creators such as myself in both getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But with all of that being said, let's hop straight into this. And first off, to answer the question I posed in the intro, can Alabama down the Georgia Bulldogs? And my answer, unsurprisingly, is going to be yes. And hear me out. I understand that the Alabama Crimson Tide have been inconsistent all year, and we're certainly going to get into some of that when we start talking about the matchups of this game. But I also look at it from this perspective. As long as the Crimson Tide has Nick Saban, I'm going to give them a chance. He is that great of a coach, and I feel like he's actually earned that from fans. As long as he's at the helm, I'm going to give Alabama a chance in any game. But I can even further that, because not only does Alabama have Nick Saban, but they also have the odds-on Heisman favorite right now in Bryce Young. Furthermore, the best defensive player in the nation, in my opinion, and Will Anderson is also on the team, and that's not a slight to Jordan Davis. Every adjective used to describe Jordan Davis in a positive manner is well-earned and well-deserved. He is a absolute freak talent at the position, and all the attention is deserved. I just happen to believe that Will Anderson is a truly special talent, and he's getting better every time he takes the field. And the way he affects the game for the Crimson Tide, I don't think his importance can be understated. So when I look at it like that, when I look at the Crimson Tide having Nick Saban, then the odds-on Heisman favorite, who has been electric and a magician when it matters most, plus Will Anderson on the defensive side, of course Alabama has a chance in this game. But that's where we really need to get into the matchups, because the matchups are what's going to tell us or give us some sort of indication as to how success can be found. And I'd really like to start off with Alabama's offense against Georgia's defense, because that's the best on best here. We have a top 10 total offense for Alabama, a top 5 scoring offense for Alabama, going up against the number 1 defense in the nation in Georgia. And Georgia has earned that right, because they have been unbelievable all year long on the defensive side of the ball. If you look at how many points they're allowing per game, it's actually kind of funny. And one thing I said in a podcast not too long ago, when someone commented and said, yeah, Georgia's not allowing teams to score, but they're not playing high-powered offenses. In 2021, I don't care who you're playing. You're playing a D1 college football team, and to hold them to what Georgia has held teams to, even though they've played some teams that have some powerful offenses or offenses that can at least affect the game in a positive manner, is unbelievably impressive. The fact that you played a D1 schedule and were that effective on defense, that's all I need to see. That right there is real. But that is also why I'm so excited for this matchup, because we're getting that best on best. Now, when I'm really diving deep into this matchup, the place we have got to start is in the trenches, and if I'm assigning an advantage and disadvantage, that's advantage Georgia. And I don't think that any Alabama fan is really going to argue with that, given the issues Alabama has had along the offensive line, because the nicest way I can put it is Alabama's offensive line has been inconsistent at best. Now, that's not to say that this offensive line isn't talented, or that this offensive line doesn't have the capabilities. They've just been incredibly inconsistent, and this is a Georgia defense that you really don't want to have those inconsistencies show their head, especially when you look at the strength of Georgia's defense, which is their front. Their front has been money for them, from the defensive tackle position to everywhere along the defensive line and the linebacker positions have been money for the Georgia Bulldogs, and that's why that first area I really wanted to evaluate was the front. Now, like I said, this is going to be a battle that, at least on paper, the Bulldogs do have the advantage. We have seen Alabama's offensive line play good football at times. They just haven't been able to do it for extended periods of time or through extended weeks. But hopefully this is a week in which they can show up. But if the Alabama offensive line is able to even mitigate Georgia's defensive front, that's where I start liking some matchups. Because if we're talking about the quarterback position, I gave that whole spiel about Bryce Young for a reason. Because he has been an absolute magician, and against Auburn, he had a bona fide Heisman moment. Because look, we can say whatever we want, right? We can say whatever we want. That the Crimson Tide's offense didn't play to their abilities for 3.5 quarters, and I'll give you that. But here's what I will say. When it mattered most, the Crimson Tide offense was flawless, and Bryce Young was unbelievable. When the moment became the biggest, that's when they showed up. And there's no bigger moment that the Crimson Tide have faced all year long than this Georgia game. And then we look at the outside. And thankfully, Jameson Williams' targeting penalty came really early in that Auburn game so that he will be available for this game because the Crimson Tide are absolutely going to need him. And he is someone who could really provide them some positive matchups to affect this defense. And it's not just him. In fact, the one area I've been really surprised about with Alabama this year is the lack of implementation of more consistent tight end play, especially when you're looking at Bill O'Brien, and especially when you look at some of the plays he loves so much. Because when you listen to Bill O'Brien talk, or at least in the past when he would talk, he would love to go off of tempo, which is just something we haven't seen from Alabama's offense with consistency this year, and that can be seen with the multiple delay of game penalties that the Crimson Tide have received. But there are matchups that I think can be taken advantage of, and if Jameson Williams can start eating, I think that allows for other matchups in the wide receiver department to really flourish. And especially if the Crimson Tide can get more tight end play implemented, especially Billingsley, because he is a mismatch, and if they can get him lined up against a linebacker, I love the Crimson Tide's chances of trying to make plays. Because you have to imagine, especially after seeing the success LSU and Auburn had against Alabama, that Georgia will have a bunch of blitzes in their back pocket if their front is able to be mitigated by Alabama's offensive line. If that happens, they're just going to dial up blitzes because that's what Auburn did to be successful. That's what LSU did to be successful. But I have a sneaky feeling Georgia's going to come out there and bet on the fact that their front is going to be able to affect the game. Like I said, if it's not, they'll have blitzes dialed up. But those blitzes are where Alabama can take advantage of aggression, and an individual such as Jaleel Billingsley would be huge in that manner. And I had someone ask me about throwing the ball to running backs out the backfield, and if I thought that could be a way to take advantage of this Georgia defense. And in a perfect world, yes. But the problem comes when that position in particular has been so decimated by injuries for the Crimson Tide that now I'm having to ask myself if they would put their only scholarship back that's fully healthy, Trey Sanders, in that position when they're already going to be leaning on him so much. And, you know, there's an argument for why not. You're already in this precarious position, and this is an individual who is hyper effective in that manner out the backfield. But that's something that could, in theory, help the Crimson Tide because it gives Bryce Young options. And especially when you have an offensive line that may not be able to give you the protection you need. I said this all in the offseason. Great tight end play, great running back play. Why did I say that? Because the tight ends are an utter mismatch if you put them against a linebacker, and the running back offers quick out pass options in case the quarterback gets into trouble. That's why I kept saying that. So there are matchups for Alabama's offense that I like. It's just about maintaining that front. Because when we look in the past, Tennessee was able to drive the ball from the 30 to the 30. The problem came when they got down into that red zone or near the red zone and the field became condensed. And then Georgia didn't have to cover as much ground and Georgia's defense started eating again. But the ability for Tennessee to move the ball does show there are ways for Alabama to attack this defense. But let's talk about the flip side. Alabama's defense has showed up the past few weeks and really helped this team, and it couldn't have come at a better time, and especially when you're looking at this game right here. Because first and foremost, Georgia runs the ball effectively from various running backs, and luckily for the Crimson Tide, you're looking at a situation where your rush defense has been stellar all season long, and that's going to be huge in this game. Because you remember what I always talk about, take away something the other team does well, because then it makes them a bit uncomfortable. They have to start reaching in back pockets to things they may not be as accustomed to running. And Georgia runs the ball with maximum efficiency. So if Alabama is able to mitigate that, you can start to get them uncomfortable, or at least in theory, get them uncomfortable. The other area Alabama has to watch out for, and discipline is going to be huge. I understand I always say that, it goes without saying, especially when you're looking at the way Alabama runs their defense. Discipline must be maintained. Gap discipline, assignment discipline, communication discipline, all across the board. And it's not just relegated to Alabama, but I digress. An area in which Alabama has got to be careful is the linebacker play. Because To'o and Christian Harris have certainly played better as of late. There's no doubt about it. But when you look at Georgia, their number one weapon in the passing game right now is actually a tight end. And because of that, you already know they're going to look to continue feeding that young man in this game. That's where I look at To'o and Christian Harris. Now, luckily, Harris has the athletic ability to be able to get out there and cover tight ends. It's just about doing it on a consistent basis. And I'm looking at that matchup right there thinking that's going to be maybe one of the most key matchups the Crimson Tide defense will have in this game. Because when I'm looking at the front, I think Alabama can get to Stetson Bennett. I think they can affect him. Now, Stetson Bennett does have a bit of mobility. He's been a bit effective running the football, but he's actually been pretty impressive from the pocket this year, averaging over 10 yards per completion, and he's had a really solid year. And because of that, he must be respected, and Georgia's offense must be respected. Let's not get it twisted thinking this is simply a defensive team. Their defense is the best thing on this team. There's no question about that. I'm not trying to slight their offense. The defense is otherworldly. It's going to be the best thing on this team. But they have a top 30 offense in total offense, and they have a top 10 scoring offense. So the offense absolutely needs to be respected, and that's why I said it gives me a little bit of comfort that Alabama's defense has come about in the way that they have. I think Will Anderson has favorable matchups in this game, and he's been so elite, he's going to be able to get his. But luckily for the Tide, Dallas Turner has been playing unbelievably good football and getting better and better. That young man is going to be a problem next year. And next year, when you pair he and Will Anderson, opposing offensive lines are not going to like that. Luckily for everybody, he's still a freshman this year. He's still learning. He's still growing. But the future is very, very high for Dallas Turner. The pair of he and Will Anderson is going to be a terrifying duo, but it didn't just end there. Byron Young has been playing high-level football in the past few games, and that's going to be a big piece in this game in particular. So we've talked about the Alabama offense against Georgia's defense and how, when you look at the battle of the trenches, Georgia probably holds an advantage there. But if they're at least able to give Bryce Young enough time, he offers what could be game-changing ability at the position. Both from his mobility to his quick release to his decision-making, there's a lot to like about Bryce Young and possible matchups. It's just all about if Alabama's offensive line can give him Tide. And let's be fair here. Georgia's defensive front has been sensational. They have earned everything they've been talked about, that they're the number one defense. They've earned that. And Crimson Tide is going to have to go out there and try and slay the giant when they're used to being in the other position. But Georgia's been the most consistent team all year. But that doesn't mean that there aren't matchups I think Alabama can take advantage of. And like I said at the beginning, so long as Nick Saban is at the helm of this team, I'm always going to give Alabama a chance. I can even further compound that when not only do they have Nick Saban, but they have the Heisman Trophy favorite in Bryce Young, who's been great. This game is going to be fantastic. This game is going to be a big game for both parties involved because personally, I don't think a two-loss Alabama team makes it into the college football playoff absent a lot of craziness happening. Because the College Football Playoff Committee has never put a two-loss team in there. And even though I'm an Alabama fan and I think they're a sensational team, and that the loss to Georgia wouldn't really be indicative of them not being a top 4 team because you lost to the best team in the nation, I do believe wins matter. And that loss to A&M, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's a game that the Tide shouldn't have lost. I'm really interested in hearing from y'all. Hop down to the comments. Let me know what you're thinking about this game. It's one we as Alabama fans, we as SEC fans have thought we would see this year. It's just we thought both teams would probably be undefeated going into this game because if you remember over the summer, I posed a question saying, could both these teams make it to the college football playoffs? I just thought they'd both be undefeated up until this point, in which case, whoever won this game would be meaningless. They'd both be in. But now, we're looking at a must-win scenario for the Crimson Tide. So hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.